Hey guys, if you're looking to buy your first reel or you want to upgrade a reel, we're going to talk about the most important things when it comes to purchasing and using these reels. Stay tuned.
That's a big round, bro.
Hey, Curtis with Fly Fish Food, and today this is going to be an awesome video, mostly because we're going to talk about cool fly fishing stuff. But specifically, we're going to talk about reels. If you are new to fly fishing, or maybe you're looking to buy your first pieces of fly fishing gear, specifically reels, or you have a reel and you want to upgrade, we're going to talk about some of the most important things that you can know and look for when you buy a reel. So let's get started. Okay, first things, a reel at the end of the day is mostly used to hold your fly line and some backing, as well as your leader and tippet, so that it's nicely packaged and not in your way when you're not using it. Now, that may sound obvious, but the fact that you can strip off as much line as there is on the reel, it does come in handy to have a nice place to store it and keep it clean. Okay, beyond just storing the line and the leader and the tippet and the backing, another thing to look at is essentially what the reel can do when you have a fish on the line and it's trying to pull that line out. So aside from just storage capacity, the other very important factor with a reel is the fact that it has what's called a drag system, and that's going to be used to help slow down the outward motion of your line. So if you get at a big fish and he's going, you want a little bit of drag or resistance so that it doesn't go crazy and go off the end of the line and you lose the fish and your line at the same time. So a fly reel typically has some sort of drag. We'll get to the drag a little later in the video, but it is important to know that that is the second function, I would say, when it comes to your reel. Okay, and the third thing that the reel does as far as function, we're talking function first off, and that is to balance the rod. So what we've got with the fly rod, even though this is a little shorty, rods are going to be anywhere from, say, 7 feet to 11 feet or more. And in order for you to cast and have that rod feel balanced in hand, most rods are going to balance somewhere in this zone. If I were to let this go, obviously to have a much longer rod, that is going to balance. What does that do for you? Well, it helps so that when you're using the rod, that it offsets and kind of creates just like you would a balance kind of a thing, so that it doesn't feel as heavy in your hand. It also helps you get a little bit more leverage when you're fighting a fish. So we're talking holding your line and your backing and all that stuff. We're going to talk about the drag and then balancing. So those are probably three of the top functional purposes that you'll find with the reel. Now we're going to get into some other items. Okay, so what we'll talk about just in relation to what I just mentioned, that is the balancing aspect, is that when you go to purchase a reel or upgrade a reel, you need to be keenly aware of the rod that you have, because the reel must match the rod. And by that I mean, I'll show you a visual obvious one. See, we've got two reels here. This one here is blue, not that that matters, but it's much larger. And then we've got this smaller reel. Now, if I were going to fish, this one is going to be fished on an 8 weight. So if you're not familiar with the rod weights basically tell us the type of line or the weight of the line, the number of grains that rod is certified to throw. So the line drives that, or you could kind of say the rod does too. Those have to go hand in hand, but also the reels need to match. So we aren't going to be putting a 10 weight line on this small reel because it's not going to fit. It's going to be heavier, longer, thicker, whatever. On the same token, we wouldn't want to put this bigger reel on a very small rod for small streams because it's going to be heavier than what the balances that I mentioned earlier. And the reel is way, way overkill for what we're going to be doing on a small stream. So The reel must match to the rod. So we're talking weights. Typically reels will have a designation for a weight or a range of weights. And we'll talk about the capacity of the reel in a little bit, but it does relate to that as well. So as you look to buy a reel, you need to, or upgrade it, you need to look at the rod and the types of lines you're going to be throwing, match that to the reel size so that you don't have a mismatch there of something that's too heavy or too light. Okay, in addition to your reel matching the rod and the line, we do want to talk about drag types that are on these reels. So as I just mentioned, if you're fishing a very small weight rod, let's say a 3-weight, which is going to be lighter weight in hand, it's going to be smaller typically, we want to match the reel to that. So now I've got a reel that's going to match my 3-weight. And then the other thing that's going to come into play, especially as we're dealing with smaller weight rods, and that is a reel. And there are 2 types of drag systems generally at a high level when it comes to reels. So there's going to be a click and pawl, which is what this reel is. And that is a lovely sound. I love a click and pawl reel. So what this reel has is inside, its drag system is basically a tooth against another, essentially a gear that will be in there. And that little tooth clicker both click so you can hear that, but it's also applying a little bit of pressure on that gear so that as it spins, it's not just spinning freely. You notice that as I flick it, I'm getting like a revolution and a half or 2, but that's on purpose because you want that to slow down the exiting of your line when you have a fish on. It's also just even stripping line off. The drag is very important as you strip line off because you don't want to just strip and have that thing spin infinitely. So a drag is very important. Click and pawl is typically going to be the cheapest kind of drag. So if you are looking at going to catch bigger fish and need something that's going to have a little bit more bite as the fish takes your line out, then you're going to want to look at a disc drag reel. And we have several different options for disc drags. In general, what you'll find with any reel that's a disc drag is you're going to pull that spool off, and what you're left here is a black box sort of thing. So the reel drag system is typically encased or sealed. You'll sometimes hear the word or the phrase sealed drag. And so a drag in this case is going to be sealed, and the way it works is more like a clutch system where you've got some plates pushing against, could be different materials in there, and you're increasing the pressure that's on that. So as the fish pulls or you want to strip line out, that drag is then going to be tighter and not allow that line to go out as quickly. Okay. The other reason that these drags are typically going to be sealed is because you might be fishing saltwater, and in which case you do not want any saltwater to get inside of something like that that has those little moving pieces and contact points. So they need to be sealed for that purpose. And then the other nice thing about disc drag reels is that they are very, very adjustable. So in this case, this is the forward. If I go backwards, so that's just the free spinning. If I go backwards, you'll notice, and I'm strong, and this thing's still pretty hard to move, but I can adjust that. So if I back off on the drag, then that becomes easier. And so what I may do when I get to the water is simply loosen the drag, strip my line off, and then at the point I have a fish on, I may tighten that drag down if I need to. So 2 types of drags. Click and pawl, typically going to be cheaper. It's also going to be found on small stream type reels. And then your sealed disc drag is going to be found on a little bit higher end reels. They're going to have maybe bigger fish or different environments that would warrant a sealed disc type drag. All right, moving on to the next item. There are a couple of things that are, I would say, newer in the reel market in the last, say, 10 years. At least they're more prevalent. And that would be what's called the arbor size. So at a high level, the arbor is simply this little thing in here. So essentially what you get with the arbor is that amount of line that you can pick up per retrieve. So a small arbor or small diameter, and in this case, a very small amount of material in the center, means that you're going to have to really crank to pick up line. So if I have all my line out on this small Arbor reel, and it's click and pawl, not that that plays into that. I'm going to be doing a lot of this as I retrieve my line. Now, these have become a little bit more prevalent in the last number of years, and that is what they call large arbor reels. And this is one I would consider large arbor. Now you'll notice that instead of a spindle that's in the very center, you'll see that the face of the surface that I put my line on is much higher diameter. What that means is that per given revolution, a larger diameter obviously is going to pull in or strip out more line. Now, you used to only see these maybe in saltwater and other applications, but they are more common. In fact, most of the reels I use for still water, because I'm doing long casts and I'm dealing with a lot of line, I love a large arbor reel because it allows me to pick the line up a lot quicker. If I'm fighting a fish, I also get more revolution. And if you want to get into the physics of it, if we're dealing with a longer arm, the torque or the force that's on that edge is going to be smaller the longer we are from the center. So I do have more leverage on the fish with the larger arbor reel. For that reason, I love large arbor reels and I fish them a lot, probably a lot more than the single ones or than the smaller ones. But there's nothing wrong with the smaller reel, arbor reel, especially if you're doing small streams in situations where you're not dealing with long casts, long runs, and fast retrieval pickup. If I'm on a boat and I catch a bonefish and it's going to take me to my backing, and I have to cast far, there's just so many things that can go wrong with that line getting caught up. So the quicker I can get that line off in a large arbor reel, the better off I am. Oh, and before I forget, one of the other advantages of a large arbor or over a smaller arbor is that due to the size of these arbors, the smaller ones will tend to have more memory on the line. So imagine just throwing that line around there on a smaller diameter. When you go to peel that off, if it's been on there for a while, it's going to kind of have these little curls. A larger arbor reel will have less of that and less curls. So this will have more curls and they'll be tighter, harder to get out, less curls, way easier to get out. All right, now the next thing, this is something that a lot of people probably don't know, and I would say as you're looking to buy a new reel, this is very important because there are a lot of people that we have come in the shop and they're getting into fly fishing. This is probably their first reel. They want to go relatively inexpensive, which we totally understand. That makes a lot of sense. I would never recommend somebody jumping into an $800 reel or $500 reel right off the bat. However, there are two types of aluminum that are used in reels, and we're going to talk about aluminum, but reels are also made of composite materials, but it's going to fall into the same conversation. So there are two types of construction when it comes to reels. The first, probably entry level, is going to be a cast aluminum reel. So this reel here, which is a Lamson, this is actually our probably highest selling volume reel because it has a sealed drag even though it is a cast aluminum. Now you may ask, why is it so bad that I have a cast aluminum reel? Short answer is this is not bad, but there are some things to be aware of. So number one would be the fact that a cast aluminum reel takes molten aluminum and it pushes into a thing and it casts it. So there's basically a form. That form is filled with liquid molten magma, aluminum, and it's dumped in there and it hardens in place, and then they take it off, sand it down, and there's your reel. The alternative is a full-on bar stock round piece of aluminum. This one here, which has from Mayfly Group, Ross Reels Able, this is an actual piece of aluminum. This one comes from Utah. Coincidentally, a lot of the reels that you buy and that are made in the US, because they are machined, a lot of the aluminum comes from Utah. So this is essentially the kind of a puck that a reel would start out with. Wrong one, buddy. Like, let's say this reel here, obviously not the exact same size, but what these are done then is they put these into a CNC machine or mill, and that the machine then machines out anything that you don't want left. So it's just going to drill around and carve it out till at the end you're left with a nice fly reel that has, it's all ported, and then they pretty it up. They may powder coat it, anodize it. And the main difference with these two types is that anything that is built from a solid piece of aluminum and machined is inherently going to be much stronger. So if I were to take both of these reels and start smacking them on a rock, or maybe I accidentally dropped it, the reel that's cast is typically going to break first. I would say not even typically, it's very likely always going to break first. We have seen this where these get dropped. They'll crack that cast piece because it's just not as impact resistant as machined. That said, the machine stuff is going to cost more. So if somebody comes in and they have a budget and they cannot go above that budget in cast aluminum, then go with the cast. Go what you can buy. And then I will also throw in another little sub category there would be composite, which could be some sort of carbon fiber chopped up and mixed with some other metals of some sort. I honestly don't even know what they're made of. Those are going to be even cheaper and likely even heavier, which is the other thing that kind of plays into that cast versus machined, is the machined aluminum ones typically will be lighter. It's going to be a little easier on your arm and hands as you handle them all day. They can tend to balance a little better. But again, it just depends on what you have going on. So that's the other consideration. If you're looking for durability and you're going to be scrambling over rocks or doing things where it may get hit and dinged, you probably want to look at going to something that's a machined reel for that matter. Okay, moving on to another one. And this is a pretty easy one. Like if you're going to be fishing in saltwater, I would tend to look for a reel that is at least rated or has the capability to be put in salt. So that I mentioned sealed drags. That would be one of the biggest indicators. For what I typically do, if my reel has a sealed drag, then I would count that as a saltwater reel. The big caveat is anytime you fish any of your gear in the salt, you need to wash it down with fresh water when you're done. I would also recommend, if your reels are going to sit there for a long amount of time after you fished in the salt, is to strip your line off as well, because otherwise it will become caked in there and that can kind of leach off and potentially damage your reel. So if you're worried about it, just check with the manufacturing specs. It will tell you, whether it's sealed and whether or not it's something that would be saltwater. And if you're ever confused, give us a ring. We can walk you through that on our own. But salt versus freshwater reel difference is another thing to pay attention to depending on where you fish. Okay, finally, and probably the biggest factor when it comes to buying your first reel or upgrading an existing reel, and that is the budget. Okay, let me set your minds at ease. At a high level, the budget, the amount that you spend on a reel is probably not going to be super indicative of how well it will perform. In other words, even the cheapest reel is probably going to hold your line just as well as some of the more expensive reels. Now, with the other factors that we mentioned, if you decide that you're fishing saltwater and you are fishing for big fish, there's going to be some things that naturally, based on what you do, will drive your budget up, or the potential target budget. But if you are going to start at the lower end, then here's what I would recommend. So first off, we carry a ton of what I would call budget reels. And again, this is not any judgment, but I would say any sort of reel that's between, let's say, 150 and 160 below, those are what I would call budget reels. We tend to not sell the reels that are in the $30 to $40 range because it is our experience that most of the brands we deal with stay away for that type of reel price point for a reason. You're probably going to get some garbage. But things like the Redington Zero, so this is a click and pull cast reel overseas. And I will also, as an aside here from the budget standpoint, you're going to typically see the cast reels come from overseas. That's the reason why they're going to be a little bit more budget friendly. Whereas the machined reels are typically going to be done somewhere in the US. And again, quality-wise, we already talked about cast versus machined aluminum. But if we're just talking about budget consideration and you wanted to get started out, I probably wouldn't want to spend less than around $100 for a reel. If you really want to push it, what I would do is I would get on like an eBay or somewhere, or your local classifieds, and look for used reels of the same criteria of all these other things we talked about, and find something that's used. You will find those a lot. And so if it were me, I would sacrifice that going to something secondhand or used over buying something extremely cheap. That's just me. However, with that said, let's talk about some of these on the budget side. Now, I want to make it clear that if you like the expensive reels, like for instance, Able is a brand. If you're not familiar with the Able brand, these reels, they make some really killer reels to begin with. They also have features that don't make you catch more fish, but it makes it more fun to catch more fish when you're dealing with a cool custom painted reel. I have some Ables. I love them. They are good reels to boot, but they're also very expensive. Would I recommend that you start with that as your first reel? No, I would not recommend that. If you wanted to and it's your money, I don't care what you do with your money. But by and large, I would look at the cast and maybe click and pawl type reels. Most of the major manufacturers, Orvis, Lamson, Redington, they will all, Echo, will all have some of these cast or composite reels that are going to be very, very budget friendly, around that 150 and below range. Now, if you did want to kind of upgrade, luckily, to a machine reel, let's say that's kind of your first break point, I would probably look at the next price point values, which are going to run, let's say, between $200 and $300. That would be, or maybe $350. Those would be your kind of mid-priced, the beginning of the machined reels. And then again, most of the manufacturers will have reels in that price point. You'll start to pick up Ross reels at that point in the $300 and above range, with not cast, but with machined and with a sealed drag. So those are the things you'd be looking for there. Now, at the end of the day, there are reels that are going to, like, we've got, like I said, this reel's probably pushing $1,000, $600-700, I think, on this one. We have a whole price range of reels. If you're just talking about pure function and you're maybe not fishing the salt so much, the price is not going to matter as much. It's not going to get you much of a differentiator. But there are some functional things like large arbors, sealed drags, machined aluminum that will push you up into a higher price point. And that's just kind of the nature of the beast. But at least you be aware of what you're getting when you buy the reel, so that if you do have a budget of, let's say, $150, there are plenty that you can choose from there. If you want to look at some of these reels, we're going to list them down and maybe lump them into buckets of price points so that you can shop based on what you want. We have them all available. If you have any questions or comments or concerns, drop them in the comments below or reach out to us at flyfishfood.com. But I hope this has been helpful. Help us out by subscribing to our channel, and also check out our free school educational channel, skool.com. Search us up, Fly Fish Food. We've got hundreds, maybe thousands of videos on helping you learn to fly fish and tie flies better every day. Check it out. We'll catch you on the next video.